Hey, wonderful. So, bonjour, Annie, bonjour as well, and welcome. Miigwech, thank you for all of you for joining us this afternoon. For this afternoon. It's hard to, with all this brilliant sunlight. Hard to think we're going to be moving into the evening. I know we all saw this big, wonderful orb in the sky and are probably very much enjoying that. So, but again, welcome to the UBC Deans and Community Engagement Series. And this will be the last series of this academic year. And so it's been a wonderful series. It's been designed to showcase a variety of speakers, focusing on really important questions and significant priorities impacting educators today. And so we have, over the course of the series, focused on indigeneity, sustainability, mental health, anti-racism, and again, bringing health into focus and health and well-being into focus for us today. And just Miigwech, thank you for that opening, a very thoughtful opening, the Song of Persistence that I guess was developed for the Flight of the Hummingbird adapted performance. And I was really struck by the framing narrative, I guess, of places in the world where people take good care. And hopefully we can think about that this evening. So my name is Jan Hare, and I'm pleased to serve as the Dean Pro Tem in the UBC Faculty of Education. I am also a very proud UBC alumni, graduating from the Department of Educational Studies. I want to acknowledge that I'm a guest on these lands, being Anishinaabe from the Chiging First Nation, and I join you from the traditional ancestor. I join you today as UBC Vancouver is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam people. And UBC Okanagan is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Silks Okanagan Nation. And these are lands that have always been a place of learning for Indigenous people who for millennia have passed on their culture, histories, and traditions from one generation to the next on these lands. And I would also like to recognize that you are joining us today from many places near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners of the caretakers of those lands where you are situated. And I believe there will be a post in the chat where you can have an opportunity to look at those territories where you are located. So I hope you enjoyed the images and the music that that was shared as you entered the Zoom room today. And they're related to our session's big theme of our session's theme of this evening, rethinking wellness and how to thrive as a school leader. And just so delighted that we have educational leaders that are joining us today who will be sharing from their experiences, as well as Dr. Sabre Cherkowski, who will lead us on this discussion as this theme really forms the basis of her research. And, having talking to educators before everyone came into the Zoom space, and, thinking about how busy people have been, just, trying to balance that work life, that personal life balance, thinking about the focus on well-being as we return in the post-COVID, returning to schools in this post-COVID, and thinking about not only personal well-being of educational leaders, but supporting the well-being of educators that we work with. So, caring for yourself while also then caring for others. So again, well-being, health and well-being is among one of the faculty priorities, and it's an important area of research for other faculty members on our UBC Vancouver as well as our Okanagan campus. So really pleased that Dr. Sabre Cherkowski will be leading this work today and engaging in conversations with other educational leaders taking on different roles throughout the province. So I will now turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Lynn Tomlinson, to begin the session for us. Miigwech, thank you. Lynn?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hare, and welcome to all our guests today. My name is Lynn Tomlinson, and I'm Assistant Dean with Professional Development and Community Engagement here in the Faculty of Education, and also a proud alum, and honored to be with you this afternoon and extend a warm welcome to all of you who are joining us today. Just a reminder that this session is being recorded, and please just see the notes in the chat regarding instructions on turning off your camera and changing your display name, if that should suit you. Sarah's really good at putting all of those things in the chat quickly as I speak, so I know they're there. We'll also share some additional resources in the chat to help ensure that this session is warm and welcoming for all in attendance, including the UBC Respectful Environment Statement and resources pertaining to UBC equity and inclusion. We'll have one presentation today, followed by a question and answer period. And as you're listening to the presentation, please consider any questions that you may have for the end of the session. We do like to be able to give you the flexibility to put up your hand, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. The question and answer that we are guiding, the structured piece, will be framed around the question, what are the conditions that contribute to schools and people in schools flourishing? And the panelists have been thinking about this guiding question framed by the theme, past, present, and future, with regard to thinking wellness and thriving as school leaders. So we're now ready to get started, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Sabre Cherkowski, and our question and answer panelists. Dr. Sabre Cherkowski is Professor and Director of Graduate Programs in the Okanagan School of Education at the University of British Columbia. She holds a Tier 1 Principals Research Chair in Leadership, Learning, and Wellbeing. She's been researching flourishing in schools for several years and was recently awarded UBC Okanagan's Researcher of the Year Award. Sabre brings her experiences as a teacher, coach, and parent to her passion for exploring what it means to flourish in work and life. Following her presentation, Dr. Cherkowski will be joined by a panel of BC-based educational leaders, and I'm pleased to introduce them. Jody Billingsley has been a teacher and educational leader for the past 21 years. He taught in Vancouver, West Vancouver, and the Bronx, New York. He currently leads as principal in the Delta School District. Jody is an educational advocate for equity, inclusion, and for doing what is in the best interest of children. He believes all children should be able to access the curriculum and find success, and that relationships and networking are key within educational systems. Jody Billingsley received the Master of Education in Administration and Educational Leadership from UBC and is a graduate of UBC's Transformative Educational Leadership Program. Nicole Davey is currently the Director of Instruction, Learning and Innovation in Nanaimo Ladysmith. She's a doctoral candidate with the University of Western Ontario and a graduate of the Transformative Educational Leadership Program with the University of British Columbia. Nicole believes that transformation in education is possible through human connection, supportive learning networks, and an unrelenting moral purpose grounded in equity. She's curious about how to support the learning of all those within the system, connecting to both the head and the heart. Alice Jungclaus is an educational leader who enables learners to develop their individual potential. She holds a Master of Educational Administration and Leadership from the University of British Columbia and is a graduate of the Transformative Educational Leadership Program. As a teacher and coach, Alice's career spanned from British Columbia in Canada to China, Japan, and Switzerland before returning to Vancouver to assume her current role as Vice Principal with the Vancouver School Board. Alice is a member of Little Pine First Nation and brings her experiences and perspectives as a Canadian of Plains Cree and Igbo descent. Annie Varghese has been an educator for over 21 years as part of the Surrey and Richmond School District. She's currently a principal in the Richmond School District. Annie received her Master of Education in Educational Administration and Leadership at UBC. As a learning leader, her recent focus is on the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and creating belonging for all learners in her school community. She's a passionate believer that all students can find success if they focus on the whole child, given a foundation of trusting relationships. Annie values mentorship and ongoing professional learning in her journey as an educational leader. Thank you to you all for joining this session. We're so excited to share some ideas with you and to think about this very important topic. And we'll start today with Dr. Cherkowski.
All right. I think as long as you can hear me, we are ready to roll. So thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this Dean's engagement series. As Dr. Hare mentioned, I am coming today from the Kelowna campus of UBC, and we are on the unceded territory of the Okanagan Silks people. And I am grateful to be a guest on this land and continue to learn and deepen my understanding of this place and building connections with community who have been caretakers of this land for millennia. And it is a pleasure to be joining you from Kelowna today and to be sharing my research on teacher and leader well-being. So I always like for folks to have an idea of where we're going and what your sort of time commitment and engagement will be. So as you can see on the slide, I'm hoping to share with you some of my research on teacher and leader well-being, give an opportunity to rethink well-being at work and really reflect on your context. And as you can see from the book that I'm highlighting there, much of what I am sharing today has been captured and documented in this book, Teacher Wellbeing. And I hope that we'll have an opportunity to try out one of the practices together. And just to let you know that this book was made for teachers, for leaders, as an opportunity to share some of the practices that emerged through the research. And so just wanted to also highlight that for you as well. As you can see on the bottom of the slide, these are three what I call important signaling questions that emerged from our research on leader and teacher well-being. And I'll keep coming back to these again and again. I want to share them with you here. And then I'll take about 25, maybe 30 minutes to share some of my research. You will have an opportunity to engage through the chat. I'll send an invitation out for you to engage with me through the session, and then we will have an opportunity to connect in with the panelists and have a conversation around that important question of what conditions can we create to promote flourishing in schools for people and for the system and the team within which we work. So here we go. So well-being in education has certainly become an essential focus for continuing improvement. And back in 2016, we were talking about teacher well-being as an important area for research. I know one of the reports that sort of made the rounds of the research world was from Dr. Mark Greenberg, and he indicated that this well-being needs to become an organizational imperative. Yes, an individual focus. Yes, a school and system focus. And what are the ways that we can start to shape our thinking around well-being to provide it as an organizational imperative? As you can see on the screen, we know there are costs to a lack of well-being. There are learning costs. There are human resource costs, financial costs, societal costs, when we do not pay attention to well-being. Well, this was certainly evident before the pandemic crisis and made more stark. And certainly it's become what I would say is non-negotiable as an important area of focus for research and practice. So we know from research on principal well-being that exhaustion and overwork are significant issues and often made worse with what Dr. Fei Wang and his research colleagues refer to as maladaptive coping strategies, which cause even more distress. Recently, from research on principals in BC, Dr. Wang, who is also a UBC faculty member, found that 80% of his respondents indicated they would like to spend more time on instructional leadership, professional development, classroom walkthroughs, hallway walkthroughs, connecting with parents and families. And I know for many of you today attending, this is a reality, wishing there was more time available. So even with a sense of frustration and exhaustion, they report feeling, 90% of his respondents indicated they felt they were making a difference. It is a good place to work, but it's challenging work. So even to think through some of the principal well-being research out of the States and Australia, again, showing that when administrators start to burn out, not only are they personally affected, but cascading effects can impact the students, teachers, and other staff members who rely on them. Just recently, it was in an airport. I always love to go through the bookstores and airports and catch up on my latest magazine reading. And a recent Harvard Business Review article indicated that for 76% of respondents in this one study on workplace lives and feedback, that leaders can have a more significant influence on them than a therapist, a counselor, a minister, or even a partner. Leaders matter. So if you take a look at this slide, recognizing the complexity and challenges that I've just shared of school leadership work, the costs of a lack of well-being, how does this slide fit in? So my research recognizes that there are diverse approaches to answering the questions we have about education in schools as organizations. We can take what we learn from these multiple approaches to build knowledge and practice for ongoing and sustainable improvement. So my research on well-being had a positive organizational approach and was framed within literature that suggests we can learn from a broader spectrum of human experiences that includes the positive. So this is counter to much research that focuses on the problems, the deficits. How do we reduce, control, or fix them? This is a similar approach to research on social emotional learning, showing that focusing on building self-regulatory strengths and pro-social competencies has benefits for self and others that you may lead. So again, a diversity of research approaches are important and contribute to a broader understanding for how to keep improving education, schooling, teaching, learning, and leading. And in this case, toward and for well-being for all. So as you can see at the top of the slide, my research comes with a positive organizational perspective. So this is from scholarship that builds on threads from positive psychology that shows there are benefits and potentials to paying attention to strength, talent, positive experiences. So on the right, you can see a list of qualities or traits that improve when we focus on these from a positive perspective. Learning, creativity, connectivity, risk-taking, health, all of these increase and improve when we focus from a positive perspective. On the left, which is probably your right, as you look at it, someone told me, Sabre, never be an aerobics instructor. You don't know your left from your right. So we can see on the other side of the screen, many of you might be familiar with Dr. Martin Seligman's work on flourishing. And he showed that these 5 pillars, positive emotion, engagement, relationship, meaning, achievement, when we pay attention to these over the course of a day, a month, a week, a life, when we pay attention to these over time, we will likely report an increase in subjective well-being. And that quote at the top with positive institutions, for me, really resonates with the role of school as a potential positive institution to not only elevate and connect human strengths internally, but can serve to refract and magnify our highest human strengths into society. So all of these pieces put together helped me to thinking about well-being from this positive organizational approach. So if we're not going to talk about the deficits and costs to the system with a lack of well-being, then what are we going to talk about? Well, at the start of my inquiry, way back in 2015, 2016, it started with an interest in compassion and leadership. And I connected with folks who were studying compassion and other human qualities at the University of Michigan Business School, and then eventually went on to connect with them further around this idea of compassion. I was also seeing the shift in curriculum in BC, providing a guide or a direction for inquiry, competency-based, focusing on student voice and agency with increased support and encouragement for teacher professional engagement to craft curricular experiences for and with their particular students, and all of this built on foundations of First Peoples principles of learning, recognizing interdependencies, complexities, diversities, the need for collaboration, creative, critical thinking. Well, when we saw all of this and recognizing that the benefit and potential of paying attention to well-being from these perspectives, from a positive approach, wondered maybe there was something we could dig into here. So if we want all these things for our students, we know we need educators who can create conditions for this and facilitate the important learning that will happen. We also know from research that previously, and I would say currently, most of the research on teacher well-being tends to be focused on mindfulness as, for lack of a better word, it's a measurable construct. We can see what happens when we increase mindfulness through either programs or practices, and then we can also measure how long does this last. And so we know from research that on mindfulness in education and in other systems that it can promote balance, increase presence, reduce burnout. So many of the really great practices and responses or outcomes from mindfulness have been suggested as opportunities for educator well-being. So I know that many of you are familiar with mindfulness and breath work, and you probably incorporate practices in your own life, your classroom, maybe in your staff meetings. Linking back into Dr. Hare's comments about this being a particularly hectic time of year and how this might be an opportunity for attendees as educators, as leaders, to just take a moment with me to join in and enjoy in whatever way you'd like this mindfulness practice. I will lead us through it. This is the first, oh my gosh, she's going to make us do something moment. The good news is you can turn off your camera. You can just be where you are, find some stillness. I will leave my camera on. At the least, you want to maybe put your gaze down and really just take a moment to pause. We'll settle. This all in is about a 2-minute practice, something that could be available to each of us during our busy days. This is from the Smart Education curriculum that was developed out of the Okanagan School of Education. So let me just lead us through 3 deep breaths. The first one, as you feel your feet on the ground, maybe taking another moment of gratitude for the place we're in and for the caretakers who have, reminding us of that little hummingbird at the start, taken such good care, and the ways that we can continue to work together to keep taking care. As you take a moment, let's just take one full breath together. We'll get a feel for breathing together. And let it out from the top of your head. So as we go through these next 3 breaths, check in with the first one, taking a full deep breath. What do you feel in your body? Where do you feel something? Breathing in, holding it at the top, and release. With this next breath in, what are you feeling? Are there any emotions? Full breath in, fill up your belly, your lungs. I like to think of breathing all the way to the top of my head. And release. And with this next breath in, all the way in, what are you noticing in terms of any thoughts? As you breathe out, I like to smile with that last breath and just have that sense that, yeah, everything is just okay right now. This is great. So I hope you enjoyed that pause practice. It is something that you can take with you and carry out, and it might be an opportunity to think, where might I incorporate some pause in my day? So wanting to learn more about well-being beyond what we know about the importance of stress reduction. And to be clear, I want to be very clear, this is essential research and practice that I fully support and encourage. How do we create systems that reduce stress and burnout, that create more support for well-being for all? With that, are there additional avenues for inquiry to learn about well-being in education, where the focus can be on moving toward a future we desire and aim to co-create? For any leadership theory fans out there, you'll recognize this is Peter Senge's ideas around leadership. So you can see on the screen, shifting minds towards appreciative inquiry. So the PERMA model through positive psychology and the principles of appreciative inquiry, often found in the positive organizational scholarship research, guided toward finding in a system what is already working to grow more of it. So Kim Cameron, Dr. Kim Cameron out of the University of Michigan Business School, and an early researcher in the POS field. He's the author of Positive Leadership. He would call this searching for positive deviance. So we thought, well, why not? How we frame our inquiry is important. The ways we think about questions, what would be a mindful approach to looking at teacher well-being? And here's your opportunity for a little bit more work. So let's take a moment to inquire into this picture. If you have your chat and you want to send out some chat answers to this, and some of you, if you've been with me in my presentations before, you know I like to use the slide as an opportunity to make a key point. So what do you see in the slide? And Sarah, if you see any chats coming in, if you just want to shout them out, I'll start everyone off. I see logs. What else? And panelists, you can help us out and get the balls rolling. What do you see? I see logs, I see trees, I see leaves. What else is in there?
Balanced logs, we see a cat. Someone sees organization, a gap that can be filled, nature, woodpile ready for winter, hardworking chopping wood.
Nice. Thank you, Sarah. Keep those rolling in. I want to go back to the second or third one that I heard you say, and for many of you, you'll know that this is here. So we do see logs, we see trees, we could say that we see balanced logs, although I'm not sure that we see the balance so much as we know that they must be balanced from our own experiences of balancing wood. There is hard work there, but I don't know that we actually see the hard work. I think we see what we know to be the experience of chopping and making log piles. We also see a cat. So everyone, if you can see, I'll see if you can head up to this top wood pile. And if you look here, tell your brain to look for an orange cat. Orange cat. Hopefully you can see it, this cute little orange cat. So I really love this picture because it helps to sort of share the idea that what we see is not actually what's physically there. It's what we anticipate seeing based on our previous experiences. It's what we think we ought to see based on what we know about the context, because we've already made a decision about the context before we look at it. These are our assumptions. There are biases. They're the ways we experience the world. Our mind loves to do this because it cuts down on the energy that the mind has to use to see things and can go on with its day and just go into what Ellen Langer would call automatic pilot. So what we're going to talk a little bit more on, what I'm going to share with you, is how I use this idea of shifting out of automatic pilot to look at well-being in our schools in different ways. So we'll say goodbye to the cat for now, but we're not going to forget the cat. We're going to bring this cat back with us. So as you can see on the screen here, I have a quote from Dr. Ellen Langer. She's a psychologist and she studies mindfulness. And you can see her quote, regardless of how we get there, either through meditation or more directly by paying attention to novelty and questioning assumptions. To be mindful is to be in the present, noticing all the wonders that we didn't realize were right in front of us. So where are those sleeping cats in our context? What if we think about them from a well-being lens? What could we open ourselves to experience and see in new ways if we learn to see with fresh eyes? Now you'll notice the hummingbird. We'll come back to that. I loved that opening music and opportunity to really get a taste for the hummingbird. You'll see the hummingbird is all through my slides going forward. So this is one of the questions that I like to use and that emerged for us to use working with my colleague at the University of Saskatchewan, looking at teacher well-being. And we began with a question, this one on the screen. What if your primary role is to learn how to flourish so that you may encourage all others in your school community to do the same? Okay, don't rush through the question. What does that actually mean? What if your role is not administrator, vice principal, teacher? What if your primary role is to learn how to flourish in your work? How does that shift the way you pay attention to your work and to well-being? So we used this question from an appreciative inquiry approach, knowing that the question is important and that it directs our inquiry. This is the question that we use to go and dig around with educators to learn a little bit more about well-being, to see how do you already flourish in your work, and what can we learn from those stories to help others think about well-being in different ways. So we started working with K-12 educators. They were all, I guarantee you, they were all, or many of them, working in under-resourced, over-demanding, extremely challenging K-12 schools. They were public schools in BC and Saskatchewan. We started asking questions about what makes them flourish at work. At some point, we even traded cupcakes for stories. Again, the food, we even traded cupcakes for stories of who they are when they feel engaged, on purpose, collaborative, and innovative. We all know that food is key to open the conversation with educators. So interestingly, we noticed the energy and shift in their experiences during the telling of the stories, during the reflecting on, the retrieving, and the telling of the stories. And we also noticed after some time spent working with colleagues, thinking about well-being and where does it exist and how can we grow more of it, that it ended up being somewhat of a sustained shift. We wrote up their cases, published them as books for them, giving them back their stories of flourishing, analyzing the case study stories, and compared and contrasted them across all of the sites. So here come the questions that I started with. These questions emerged as helpful for finding flourishing, nurturing, flourishing, and letting go of what works in a way that lets us sustain the flourishing. As you can see in these images, we worked with educators in ways that they thought would be helpful to uncover and look for flourishing. I love the ice cream sundae challenge. It was an opportunity for all of the already organized departments to go on a happy hunt and find all the ways that they see flourishing over the course of a month, send in their, whether it's texts or emails or pictures or sticky notes. Teachers love sticky notes, as we can see in the middle. What are the ways that we can capture our flourishing? And then as you see in the other picture with the large group of us being silly and having some fun, what are the ways that as we share our flourishing experiences together, how does that open space for us to further think through, engage in, and develop more opportunities for flourishing? So I want to share just a few of the findings with you. So you can see in this lovely image, there's the hummingbird, and you're all wondering, when will she unleash the hummingbird? It's coming. As you can see from the stories of the educators, determined 3 what I'll call domains of flourishing that seem to be evident as structural processes in the schools. So leaderful mindsets, opportunities for many to feel engaged and connected to making a difference in their school, to being part of that positive change. Adaptive community. It was really important for educators, with the support of their leaders, to have spaces and places where they could tinker, where they could innovate, where they could fail and try again. And this for them was really creative and fun work. It was also challenging work. And so what are the ways that educators created norms within their community that help them to talk about the ways that they want to continue to innovate in their teaching as part of what it means to flourish as an educator? And of course, subjective well-being. What are the ways that we can create opportunities for educators to feel a sense of well-being? You can see compassion at sort of it started my journey into teacher well-being. It has remained an important piece and component of what it means to feel well and to connect as humans with humans in the work of developing humans. I mean, that's a pretty weighty and lofty work that we all do, along with trust and hope, and as 3 virtues or hosting virtues. So I'll share this here just as an opportunity to see again the different sort of bricks or blocks of flourishing. These are stories that came up over and over again. And I think if you read through, you'll see, yeah, that resonates with me. When I feel engaged, connected, on purpose, interested in tinkering and tweaking and learning how to do more in my work, much of what is on the slide you will see in your own work. So as I said, I would like to give you an opportunity to think through what does this mean in your own context. And I also shared, I'm going to share around the hummingbird. So one of my amazing graduate students, Kelly Hansen, found this story early on. It's originally from Wangari Maathai, who shared this video that we saw of her telling the story of the hummingbird. And let me play it here for you first, and then we will have a quick minute to debrief it. Hopefully you can hear it.
We are constantly being bombarded by problems that we face, and sometimes we can get completely overwhelmed. The story of the hummingbird is about this huge forest being consumed by a fire. All the animals in the forest come out and they are transfixed as they watch the forest burning, and they feel very overwhelmed, very powerless, except this little hummingbird. It says, I'm going to do something about the fire. So it flies to the nearest stream, takes a drop of water, and puts it on the fire and goes up and down, up and down, up and down, as fast as it can. In the meantime, all the other animals, much bigger animals like the elephant with a big trunk, could bring much more water. They are standing there helpless, and they are saying to the hummingbird, what do you think you can do? You're too little. This fire is too big. Your wings are too little. And you're big, so small, you can only bring a small drop of water at a time. But as they continue to discourage it, it turns to them without wasting any time and tells them, I'm doing the best I can. And that to me is what all of us should do. We should always feel like a hummingbird. I may feel insignificant, but I certainly don't want to be like the animals watching as the planet goes down the drain. I will be a hummingbird. I will do the best I can.
So I was really the hummingbird story inspired me as a researcher and a parent, a community member. How can I notice my small gifts and how to share them the best I can? It resonates with the focus of well-being as a professional learning stance. How can I notice what works well? How can I nurture these small pieces? And how can I let go to sustain who I am at my best as an educator? I just read a study about well-being in universities. It was carried out in the United States, and their findings are that for those wanting to make a positive difference towards student well-being, they should start small with different things. So this is me now interpreting, shifting out of autopilot with a mindful approach to what works to make you feel well, to make others feel well, and tweak often to ensure we are hitting the right notes. So this lines up with findings from research I recently carried out with Kate Story at the U of Alberta on well-being across systems, where districts who circled back to check in and tweak their where needed tend to have schools and those in them report a sense that their well-being felt like it mattered. It felt like it was being supported. So it's not unlike Nell Nodding's theory of caring, where she indicated that caring is only happening when the one who is being cared for feels the care. And so when we think about that from a well-being perspective and what can we do as leaders, how can we get to know the ways in which well-being is experienced by those in our schools, by ourselves, and how can we help to promote more of what works for them and for us in a way that helps us flourish? So I want to just share where my research is taking me, and I think I'm almost out of time, and I'm really excited to hear from the panelists. So I did want to share that I continue to inquire into this idea of appreciative awareness. This is what I am calling appreciative awareness, a mindful approach to notice and nurture what we want to grow in our work through learning to see. And I'm interested in understanding how we can develop and support appreciative awareness among leaders, whether in a system, in a school, through university learning, through association and program systems. I'm also curious to know what happens when we learn to see well-being from a systems view as inclusive communities of belonging, affirmation, and connection. What happens if we shift the question about well-being towards equity, towards justice, towards inclusion, belonging as essential priorities for well-being? So I'm really curious if you're out there and are curious along with me and want to join in, or think school or someone you know would be interested. I'm really curious to learn what happens when we can continue to shift the focus around well-being. So I will leave you with this. I don't know that we have time to do the practice together. This is a flourishing inquiry model. You can see as you make your way around each of the pieces, shifting our thinking and diving into happy hunt, to hunt for flourishing. What makes us feel alive and well in our work? If it's been a moment, it might take some time to think back to it. But when have you felt that sense of purpose? Who are we at our best? What are our strengths, our talents, our gifts? Play. How could we bring this how could we bring it to life with a more playful approach, with an opportunity to risk take, to innovate in our thinking around well-being, and then what will support innovation? So panel, hang in there. I am coming for you. This, if anyone wanted to screenshot as a fun sort of homework activity, take some time, do that pause practice, and then take an opportunity to develop some professional learning around well-being, thinking around the questions. What does it feel like to live out your purpose? Who have you been in the past? What are you currently experiencing that you can nurture and grow to build those conditions for the future you want to create with others? So hopefully I've set us up for our conversation. I will leave it. Where should I leave it? Here? Where would you like it? I'm going to turn to my panel. Where would you like it, panel?
I like that model, Sabre. I like that model.
I will say thank you very much and go on mute for a little bit here. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing your research on this very important topic, Dr. Cherkowski. I love the cat image and the disruption it provoked in my thinking. What a great way to start your presentation. I really couldn't see it until you pointed it out. So I was thinking I was losing my mind when Margaret Paxton said, there's a cat there. We need to develop those, we need to develop those positive institutions that value trust and compassion and hope, and thinking about shifting our perspectives, about this work and how we can help people feel well is just so important. So thank you. I know our panelists have much to share as well. connected to this. So we'll now move to the Q&A. We asked the panelists to provide a question that they hoped they would be asked regarding this topic. So we'll start off with posing those questions to get the conversation started. And then we'll move on to questions from the audience. And when the time comes, if you can use the raise your hand feature to pose your question, it just helps us keep them in order and it helps me moderate. So I'd appreciate if you could do that. But if you're more comfortable just putting a question in the chat, we'll try and get to those if time permits. So panelists, you're ready. Got our cameras on. So the first question is for Alice. So Alice, given the history of schools and schooling in Canada, what can we do to respectfully recognize and amplify the strengths and diverse traits of students, teachers, and leaders who've historically hoped to be valued and included for their unique contributions at all levels in our school environments?
Thank you, Dr. Tomlinson. That's such a rich question, multi-layered, but I want to first acknowledge and situate myself before I answer. For context, I've been away from Canada for 17 years, and so my recent return is as a result of the good work that has been done, that I've been observing from abroad for Indigenous peoples, education in public and even private schools. So as a member of the Little Pine First Nation and as an Igbo who may not look like everyone in the school system, we need to just keep that in mind for all of our stakeholders and all of our colleagues. It is not unique to me. This is a shared story. So there are three things that I would offer to continue to flourish in this important and hard work. The first one is to continue to tell the truth about Canadian history. That is a must, but it needs to be developmentally appropriate from my perspective as an educator. And I think there's a lot of good work in that regard. Telling the truth also requires looking at what kind of feedback loops existed in the past. And so if there have been a historically negative feedback loops, the solution lies in amplifying the positive feedback loops for our students, for our colleagues, for ourselves in a focused, frequent way. It's an inside job, and that spirals out and ripples out. The second thing I'd like to offer from my perspective in a school, now that I'm back in Canada, is this shared knowledge to keep amplifying our growth and shared knowledge as a method of empowerment for all stakeholders in our schools. One of the examples was mentioned by in the presentation, and that's the First Peoples Principles of Learning. This is a wonderful practice that we continue to make and ripple out for other communities. And the last comment I want to make is continue those strength-based conversations. The relational conditions is the focus. So that's the individual trust of self within the system, and then the interpersonal trust with the people you work with, the families and the children and the learners and the leaders. All stakeholders deserve to feel pride in who they are. And that is a sense of agency that fuels the feelings of empowerment and forward movement. So the absence of a shared knowledge, really in sum, it just possibly could encourage the acceptance of the status quo, which we all know we're working hard to do the good work to keep moving towards the future and keeping that positive feedback loop. Thank you. Those are my initial comments.
Thank you, Alice. Nicole, I'm wondering if you have some additional comments for that question. I know you do.
I do. Thank you, Dr. Tomlinson, and thank you, Alice. This is such a rich, layered question. I think it is important to intentionally connect Indigenous ways of knowing and being with creating the conditions for flourishing. Relationality, identity, interconnection, well-being, holism, these are woven throughout cultures of flourishing, and we need to notice and name them as Indigenous principles. This amplifies and creates spaces for voices and perspectives that have historically been pushed to the side and undervalued. We need to include everyone's stories and ask all members of our communities not only what they need to flourish, but what it means to flourish to them, because we know this work is highly personal and contextual and cultural. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. We'll move on to our second question, and this question is for Jody. Jody, how has teacher wellness and awareness of wellness changed since the pandemic?
Thank you, Dr. Tomlinson, for that question. And of course, I also want to situate myself in the traditional territory of the Tsawwassen and Musqueam First Nations and pay honor to all the Hunkaminam speaking people who have been stewards of the land since time immemorial. And of course, honor elders past, present, and emerging. I'll look at this question sort of as the pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. So when you think about teacher wellness and awareness and wellness in general, from my own noticings, I saw that before the pandemic, wellness was at the forefront, just like Dr. Cherkowski was mentioning earlier, but it seemed to be more about student wellness and more about, getting the right sleep, the amount of diet, daily physical activity, self-regulation, mind up. And there was focus on teachers and leadership, but there is that before COVID, this sort of servitude where people will give themselves over so much that it's almost at an expense to themselves. But it seemed to be within a context that seemed to be a little bit more predictable. And then when COVID happened, there was this great shift in our system in terms of what we're used to. And whereas before there seemed to be this more openness with the revised curriculum and looking at wellness and really going into that spiraling curriculum of where are we going to explore and uncover rather than tick off all the boxes of a curriculum. During the pandemic, I really feel that because everyone's wellness was kind of turned upside down, everyone sort of fell back on old practices. So practices where not everyone, but many fell back on what was comfortable for them, and what seemed to be more of an ecosystem turned back into more of going back to a bit of an industrial revolution model of like putting things into boxes and, kids into rows and all of that. But from that, what we found was that teachers were very resilient, and there was a sense of that servitude again, and that they were going to make it work. And teachers rose and they kept going, but also at an expense of their own wellness, because being bombarded all the time with many daily bombardments of the news around COVID and what was happening to everybody. All the different protocols that came out that segregated children and segregated, teachers from each other, and then that connectedness was taken away. But at that silver lining that we're always trying to find, and so that appreciative part where we're learning that, well, even though this happened, we have a resiliency. We still have to come together for students, for each other. And actually, what I found was that colleagues were actually helping each other in terms of technology and innovation, so that students were moving forward. And then now wellness, I find from that. And even though there may still be this thread of uneasiness that's happening in the world because of the pandemic, I find that there is that appreciative awareness, that area of like what is working for the teacher and their wellness, so that permission to be able to look at about can they recognize when they are well, and then when they're feeling that sense of purpose and joy and moving forward. And so that appreciative inquiry is really important. And then around where you're going with wellness. And so now I see that teachers and educators and leaders are not just thinking about, I need to get enough sleep, but actually thinking about how am I in tune with myself? Am I well? Am I showing up well enough? And is that translating to your environment, and really looking at it again as an ecosystem moving forward and really helping each other out. So, and then I look at educational leaders in that way as needing to get rid of the barriers that stop, the teachers from, or educational leaders from being distracted, or stopping them from, and getting caught up in and distracted by all the different things that come into our lives. So trying to remove barriers so that they are well, for the students. And so I feel like now that's that permission to be aware of their own mindfulness, their own wellness, and then also thinking about all of the equity, looking at wellness from different perspectives, and making sure that we're not just taking into account that wellness is just from a Eurocentric Western point of view.
Thank you, Jody. Annie, can you provide some additional comments to Jody's response?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Tomlinson and Jody. I also want to just acknowledge that I'm on the unceded and traditional territories of the Hunkaminam language speaking group, on privilege that I have to both work and learn and live here. So I'm very grateful for that. I would echo very, very similar to what Jody has spoken as well. You know, at the onset of the pandemic, and as we sort of navigated through the challenges of the pandemic with our students not returning to us, you know, navigating many new ways of delivering curriculum and checking in with our students. I think the biggest thing that we heard from our staff and our people was the loss of connection, right? We could no longer connect directly with our students. We couldn't connect with our families. We couldn't connect with our communities, and we couldn't connect with each other. We were isolated in our homes. And when you think about education, human connection is the foundational piece of how we learn, how we work together, and how we really move forward. So there was that sense of overwhelm, a sense of distress, anxiety about not only our physical health for ourselves, but also our family and our students. And that brought about a level of mental unwell that really was amplified during that time. And, you know, and I think what I heard most from our teachers was, we're in this collective shared experience, but we still want to do our job well. We want to know that our students are well. We want to know that our colleagues are well. So this collective shared experience really brought, as much as it isolated us, it also brought a unified sense of we want to continue the work and we want to do it well. So, but how do we do that when we have lost that connection? And I think what it has brought about, and the change, maybe the perspective of wellness that it has brought about, if I can use one word to describe it, it would be grace. I think it has brought a lot of grace. It has shifted mindsets in terms of understanding and having empathy for where our students come from, and also how we understand and learn about each other as colleagues. So I think the underlining word for me that has shifted in how we look at our own personal wellness, but also our wellness as a community, is exercising that grace and understanding and taking on a mindset that we have a collective shared experience now. So we can understand when there are limitations in what we can do. We can understand when somebody is not feeling their best, and we can maybe share that burden and carry the load for everybody. So, and I think with that, the biggest feedback that has come back to from a school leader perspective is we want to feel supported in that. We want to know that we are being supported. We want to know that our leaders, our communities are going to exercise this same grace towards us that we're going to be showing to our colleagues and our students and our families. So I think it's, you know, so much, it's shifted away from thinking about ourselves and our own wellness to really thinking about what is our collective wellness and how do we work to establish a healthy state of mind there as we have now shared this experience and move forward from there.
Thank you, Annie. I have so many comments to make, and I'm not supposed to, so I'm just not going to, but it's really hard. You get to respond. Thank you. Nicole, I have a question for you. What are the barriers that are getting in the way of creating cultures of flourishing? And how might educational leaders address these barriers?
Well, so many connections, Annie and Jody, and I'm so excited about this conversation. But first of all, I would like to acknowledge that I have the honor of living, learning, working, and playing on the unceded territory of the Nanaimo people. And I am new to these lands, so I just want to recognize that I have a commitment to learning the stories of this land, and I'm very grateful to be here. But when I think about the barriers to creating conditions for flourishing, I think of mindset. We know the importance of relationship and belonging and well-being and connection and social emotional learning. We know these are important for teaching and learning to take place, but sometimes I feel these are seen as separate or other to the work of teaching and learning, and not the actual work of teaching and learning. We often see our system as a puzzle, and maybe flourishing is a piece of that puzzle. And if we want to address this piece, we take it out, we examine it, and then we respond to it. And we may create well-being programs for our employees or social emotional lessons for our students, which are all great things, but these can feel very siloed and separate. And I once again connect to Indigenous knowledge systems and feel we have a great deal to learn. And as a Métis educator, I connect strongly to the metaphor of weaving and see the system more as a tapestry or a scarf, and the thread of flourishing is woven throughout. You can't take out the thread without the whole thing coming apart. And I think this supports a holistic, interconnected, and relational mindset or way of looking at the world. So how can we shift mindsets? How can we create the conditions for reflection, bringing educators together to learn with and from each other, to take risks, to be vulnerable, to explore new ways of thinking, maybe share food, share passions, share laughs. And to me, this all goes back to collaborative inquiry. Collaborative inquiry is no stranger to BC educators, but I think COVID impacted our inquiry mindset. I mean, of course it did. We needed to be compliant and ask permission. We couldn't take risks or be creative for very good reasons. But now that we are past COVID, I think it's time to flex this muscle again and maybe ignite an inquiry renaissance. We also know that post-COVID has been challenging. We're experiencing challenges we haven't seen before. And when we get stressed, as Jody mentioned, we revert back to old ways of doing things. We retreat and close the door, go into survival mode. But collaborative inquiry helps us open those doors as leaders. It provides connection and purpose, increases efficacy, curiosity, and helps foster trusting, genuine, and supportive relationships that are key to creating cultures of flourishing. So through human connection, networks, and relationships, we can reflect and learn and grow and flourish and tackle the challenges before us. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Jody, I know you've got some additional comments for that question. Thank you.
When I think of and Nicole, it was amazing, and Alice and Annie, thank you for all of your thoughts. I really appreciate it, and it's nice that we build on each other. It's very wonderful to hear everyone's story in all of this. I think of language as a barrier, and really that language of moving from that deficit language to that learning language, and really allowing permission to be able to flourish. And I think that's a hard part for educators, because that permission, like Nicole just said, wasn't there during the pandemic, right? We didn't have permission to do what we were always wanting to do. So you even trying to separate 5-year-olds from touching each other is impossible, but we had to do it. And then of course that barrier of the language that was around our role as educators actually changed completely. And then people are probably reflecting on, who am I as an educator within this system that is limiting us? But I think that resiliency and equity and looking at that, really challenging colonial thought, and really thinking that mindfulness and being aware of wellness, there are many different perspectives to consider, not just one, right? So thinking about First Peoples principles of learning, an immigrant experience, everything that around what is wellness in other areas of the world, and how can we bring that back so that we can create that tapestry that Nicole was just speaking of. And I think that is a positive thing when you're looking at flourishing, where you're thinking of it as like an ecosystem or togetherness, that we're actually connected, and that if we're looking at the way that we're challenging language, we can challenge our biases, and we can challenge all of those things that we went back to, and now we can revisit it again. And actually, I love the idea of a renaissance, Nicole. I think that's fantastic. And I look forward to that happening in education right now. And I think it's starting already. So that's great.
Thank you, Jody. And just to let the audience know, this is our last structured question. So if you're beginning to bubble up with some ideas for questions, we'll be opening it up to you with a raised hand after this last one. So this question is for Annie. Annie, how do we leverage the collective human strengths in schools to both widen the connections and deepen the good work that's already being done? And how do we sustain staff engagement so that we look to the future with hope and optimism?
Thank you, Dr. Tomlinson, for that question. When I thought about this question, I think, Dr. Cherkowski, I channeled your work, and what you presented today really is the foundation of how I think of school leadership and how we as educators play a role in education, and what is our responsibility within the system. So when I thought about this question, really the strength of our community is our people. Right? That is the true strength of education, is the people that we have that sense of connection with. And when we think about wellness, in order for us to focus on that, we need to pay attention to the well-being of our people and be intentional in recognizing the success of our community is when we can bring people together. And paying attention to how we support both the physical and emotional wellness of our people. So when I sort of thought through this question through the lens of, what are the conditions that contribute to schools and people flourishing in schools, is I've thought about 6 components. And I think Dr. Cherkowski has really presented all of what I have to say. So I'm just really going to summarize my own thoughts and how I approach from a school leader's perspective. First and foremost, of course, is the relationships and the compassion that we have. Understanding each other as people, knowing the stories of our people, knowing our own stories and being rooted in that, and how we see how that story shapes our role within the system. And we know that we've collectively come through a difficult time, but we want to move forward because our work matters. It matters to our students, it matters to our families, it matters to our communities, and it matters to our colleagues. The pandemic took away a lot of our connections, so we have to strengthen that back again. As we said earlier, that human connection with our students, our community, and with each other as educators is really the foundation of our work. And we lost sense of that. So now it's that deliberate work to bring that back, because I think part of what COVID did was make our profession lonely again. We were isolated, we were siloed. And that sense of community, when we had all of those restrictions in place, directly impacted our classrooms. We had no kids in the hallways. Even when we returned to face-to-face instruction, we had nobody in our hallways. There was no hustle and bustle in our staff rooms. That human connection was essentially lost. So now the first and foremost thing is to re-strengthen that relationship through compassion and understanding of where people are at, and recognizing I think there was a phrase that was used in my TELP colleagues will understand, go at the speed of trust, right? Which is that second piece. There's some deliberate work that must be done by school leaders to reestablish trust. And that comes from being honest in our own work and really role model the accountability that we have within the work that we do. And a community flourishes when people are trusted and appreciated for their work and the value that they bring. And trust brings the capacity to be able to take risks. And because there's a supportive network, and I think Dr. Cherkowski, you said this, the opportunity to fail and rework and rethink and come back to it again, that comes from that established trust and the speed of trust that we move based on the people that we have. And the third piece that I really resonated with what Dr. Cherkowski was speaking about is recognition. Being a big part of building trust is to refocus through an appreciative lens. We need to notice, we need to name, we need to nurture what is happening now. That is, and what is the good work that's happening now, because that's going to sustain the practices that leads us to flourish and continue to flourish. And we need to be deliberate in this. We need to take time to do this, to highlight the stories of what's happening, the professional learning that's evolving. There's so much learning as educators that's happening as a result of the time that we've just come through. And most importantly, ask the questions of how is it impacting student learning and how will that inform my practice moving forward? And in order for us to really take that appreciative lens, sort of the fourth thing that I've been thinking a lot about is listening. Not only listening because we need to ask questions and to be curious, but am I listening with empathy? We need to be curious about the successes, but also the challenges that are existing for our people right now, so that we can look at the present and we move forward by understanding the challenges to remove those barriers and find ways so that we can look to the future with that hope and optimism. And the biggest piece that I found in the last couple of years is when I'm listening to the people that are telling me about what are their challenges and their struggles, is that we have within our school community, we need to build on what we know. We know what is good for our learners. We know that already. We know the practices that are going to be impactful for our learners. So rather than trying to do something entirely new because we're in a time that is unfamiliar to us, let's go back to building on what we know is good for our learners. Dr. Cherkowski, I'm going back to your work again. This is a quote directly from one of your slides. I think it says, people increase their confidence for change when they build on what they know. Right. So it's not that we want to overburden our people with new things, but we need to know where we are so that we can build for hope. And when we look for what is yet to come, and part of that building is rethinking our existing structures. This is sort of the final piece that I've been thinking about. There is a deep sense of being overwhelmed right now because of the current time that we're in. We've come through a lot. So rather than adding new things, looking for ways to change because we think that we're in such a time, rather than doing that, let's go back to what we know is good. Let's reframe our existing structures. Let's rethink what resources do we already have in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of people that already exist, so that we're taking away the feelings of overwhelm, we're taking away the feelings of being under-resourced, and we are looking to what already is in our hands so that we can take that and shape it to continue the good work that we know is happening. And so the emphasis is on extending the connections and linking our people more together, which is what's going to strengthen our community, rather than trying to spread wider and thinner, so that the work that's happening is going to go deeper and have stronger roots, as opposed to trying to always do new things and be in that state of feeling overwhelmed. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Alice, any additional comments to that response?
Oui, le défi, c'est ce que Jody a dit, c'est la langue. Alors maintenant, je sépare le groupe. Et ça, c'est l'histoire du Canada. And I'll translate for us. Going deep within the history of Canada, continue to tell the story of language. Thank you so much, Jody. And looking and listening is more than just the embodiment that we see, that deep, deep meaning. Feeling when we hear our languages spoken. We're so lucky to live in Vancouver with major diversity. It is such a rich environment. Building that kind of vocabulary of hope about the strengths of diversity, and bringing the vocabulary of agency to students in their languages, and for ourselves and also for the people we work with. So basically, I just love this language piece. I won't switch into any of the other three that I speak. I think the point was made. There is a deep, invisible attachment to who we are from within. And I think focusing on those positive feelings, how do students want to feel at school? How do staff want to feel at school? How do administrators want to feel at school? And how can we use language, thank you, Jody, to see, hear with our heart, the stories that they share, so that we can ask the right inquiry questions that help them discover, not us, that the most meaningful change is self-change, and that every small individual action ripples through the system and impacts on a larger scale. So the hope piece is the language we use, that is the invisible structure that we here on Great Turtle Island with all of our stories are working really hard to listen more and connect more so that we can leverage all the beautiful strengths and invite more people in to be seen, heard, cared for, respected for their knowledge and contributions.
Thank you, Alice. And thank you to our panel for your thoughtful responses and really thinking about, past, present, and future, and sort of helping educators thrive in their communities and in their schools. I'll open it up now to the audience to see if there are any raised hands, and you're welcome to just open up your mic and ask your question. I don't see any hands yet. Ragat, go ahead. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, everyone. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. I'm joining you from London, Ontario, Canada. I'm a PhD candidate at Western University's Faculty of Education, and I must say I'm thrilled to hear about compassionate leadership in schools, because for the past 5 years, that's been my passion. And one of the questions that I had was, in my time living at California 1 year, I participated in a compassion cultivation training program with the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. And so part of my research has been around exploring the impact of systemic compassion cultivation training programs on supporting schools, educators, leaders, even students with holistic, all of the beautiful, wonderful things you've been talking about, with increasing skills like connection and courage and empathy and listening. And I'm over here in Ontario, and I just wondered, is there more discourse around these type of compassion cultivation programs and their impact happening in UBC? Because as far as I know, it's still a very emerging area in Ontario. So I just wondered if that was happening and if anyone had any thoughts around that. Thank you so much.
Sabre, thank you.
Sure, I'll just do a very brief comment, and then I'd love to hear from others around this. Thank you so much for the question. And the serendipity of this question is not surprising, as I don't know if Lisa Bayless, I know she's here as well, and she and I met today. So talking about this idea of compassion and leadership in schools, and how do we create more connections, and the ways that my research started with compassion has now come back around and into this idea of compassion. And I know that in BC, there's certainly some work around compassionate systems and the ways that we can increase and just promote more attention to what it means to be a compassionate leader. And I think the piece that I would say, certainly at UBC, I'm starting some research with nursing colleagues around this, and looking at the ways, how do we go beyond established structures that someone has determined will work for us, to start to notice our system in ways that help us to see the compassion that may be there if we pay attention to it in new and different ways. And I know that maybe I'll draw on Margaret Wheatley for all of us leadership theory fans. She talks about a system strengthening and building and growing from turning to within to see and connect to itself more substantially. And I would see that with compassion, that turning ourselves into the system to see and connect, and then to just iterate all of what these brilliant panelists were sharing around the importance of recognition, affirmation, contribution, connection, seeing. So I'll stop there, but I'm so pleased, and please continue to reach out and connect. There are many people in BC doing amazing work. And would love to join with others doing this. Thank you for being here. I'll try to stop talking, but I'm just glowing with excitement around the ideas shared today. So thank you.
Thank you, Sabre. There's a question in the chat, so I'll move to that, not seeing a hand up at the moment. How do you help support and move people forward when an organization gets into a state of paralysis, whether from the sheer enormity of ensuring all voices, souls are included, or the fear people get getting it wrong and unintentionally hurting others? I love the idea of being intentional about how much is taken on, but also any change can be overwhelming depending on where a staff is at. So I'm not sure if Jody, thank you.
I think it's like what Dr. Cherkowski started with at the beginning with the hummingbird. It's like you're doing the best you can with one thing at a time and starting really small. So I'm reminded of a personal story of during the pandemic when I started to see staff really feeling very disconnected from each other, very overwhelmed, very much going down that area of feeling burnt out, really reaching out and trying to figure out what are they needing from me as a leader to sort of help them and lift their spirits, and really listening with intention and authenticity, and really meeting them where they're at. And what sort of ended up establishing it, and I mean, it's not very profound, but it was just a 2 o'clock Zoom check-in where everyone could talk about the elephant in the room and really be open and vulnerable, and really start to look at what is it that we need and how are we going to move it forward. And I'm not sure if you're meaning the intent of getting it wrong around certain things, like looking at the different diversity in the schools or the different voices, or trying to make sure that everyone feels included. But I think when you're meeting with an open heart and open ear and an open mind, I think you're already starting to do that anyway. And so being intentional can just be around going to the people that you're with and saying, what is it that you need from me so that I can help you flourish, so that you're able to help the students flourish, because we know that it's that trickle down effect.
Thanks, Jody. Alice?
Just a short comment about emotions and this big emotion, fear. Fear is an invitation for greater self-awareness. And I love a lot of the comments today are connected to the relation. So if it's inviting fear within the person we're working with or within ourselves, and we're invited to greater self-awareness, that exacts a price. Transformation, every transformation exacts a price. So what is that price? Me as a vice principal, I need to be more open and slow down, like practical strategies. Working with a student and resource, slow down and actually hear and listen with the heart, and the timeliness of the change is critical. So if there's fear, whether it's in a learner or a teacher or an adult, this is the time to, I heard the word compassion, so I'm thinking of clarity and my willingness to focus on the clarity that the other person wants, that platinum rule, that have I asked them how, with a really great inquiry question? How do you like feedback? How do you want support? How do you want to feel? How can I make sure that I create the conditions for you according to what your needs are? Because that's really important. That just makes my shoulders drop. So that's just something I wanted to build on about change and transformation. It requires within the relationship, self-change is the foundation of all meaningful change.
Thank you, Alice. Nicole, did you have your hand up? Yep.
Yeah, I'd like to just add, I think, first of all, the fact that staff are being honest, that they're feeling overwhelmed, that they're having a hard time, that they're struggling, that's a huge win. We want the people that we work with to be honest and open and not feel ashamed or embarrassed or whatever, and close their door and just not engage anymore. And I think it's really important to be honest about what we're seeing and experiencing. I call these wicked problems. These are problems we've never seen before, we've never faced before. And we need to acknowledge there's no right answer. There's no blueprint, there's no magic bullet. If we just bought this program, if we just did this, everything would be okay. And just to acknowledge that we are co-creating the response and the solution in real time. And that's, I think, can be hugely empowering, is that we have a hopeful, strength-based approach, and that it's not us just not knowing what the answer is. The answer hasn't been created yet.
Thank you, Nicole. Annie?
I just wanted to add one more piece. You know, I think I agree with what everything that Alice, Nicole, and Jody have mentioned, but in terms of the work that we've been doing, one of the key things that have been moving forward with staff has been to reposition ourselves around the why. Why do we do this work? Why is that important? And I think, you know, we had such a different focus for the last couple of years. It was really about survival. It was about safety. So that some of the deeper meaning, the deeper questions as to what informs our practice and why we do it, we needed a refresher. And I think, as we sort of come out of this phase, that's been really helpful for us as a school community to really realign ourselves with thinking about, why do we do this? Why is this important to us? And from there, then small manageable steps for change become possible. And that path becomes a little bit clearer and much more manageable for us to think about, because there is an anchor for us to go back to.
Thank you, Annie. Any other closing comments from any of our panelists, or any other questions from the audience before we wrap things up and call in Dr. Hare for her words of wisdom? I know she's there. Okay. Thank you very much to all of you. I know Dr. Hare would like, and it's just been a wonderful conversation. I'm just so appreciative to hear from you all after a long day for everybody. So Dr. Hare, if you're there,
Yes, yeah.
I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Oh, okay, Miigwech. Thank you, Lynn. Wow. I just want to say what an incredible conversation that Dr. Cherkowski's work has inspired for us this evening. And I do see that orb setting, so it is, we are moving into the evening, but, and as well as the story of the hummingbird in flight as motivation. So I have to say, as an educational leader, tonight, I feel really uplifted. You've really nurtured my spirit. So thank you to Dr. Cherkowski and our educational leaders presenting today. I really recognize, using that fire metaphor, that the work of educational leadership is often putting out fires, but also it's sometimes needing to start a few as well. So, and as a result, how this work can then place stress on us, impacting our well-being. But I heard this, disrupting practices and new practices that are emerging that can contribute to that stress. And but just thinking about, and I think what I really appreciated about this, the entirety of this conversation was really that we, discussing well-being and collective wellness from a positive lens. All of you talked about appreciative awareness and drawing from those elements of the flourishing inquiry model. And really also focusing on those, the teachers, the educators that you work with, that you recognizing the significant influence that you have on those around you, the teachers, the students, the families. So thinking in that holistic kind of way. I'm really understanding that professional development, making well-being not only a part of our everyday practice, but fostering that kind of professional development and needing to change policies and standards and practices that then support well-being. But most importantly, what I heard tonight, and it is really how well-being in our schools is diverse, it's fluid, it's shaped by context and across time and change, and it's unique to each of us. So hearing people talk about connections with each other, connections with other ways of thinking about the world, drawing on Indigenous principles in talking about what flourishing might mean to them. But not only thinking about well-being in the context of flourishing, but I also heard talking about well-being as repair. Alice pointed out about, learning about different histories. I heard a really powerful statement, our profession was made lonely. Wow, that really struck with me. And with Annie talked about that and how we had to build that back. And so as we, I guess I just want to close with how I recognize that connection is important, and that's what was emphasized in these talks, that connection to those around us, how important it was to build those relationships and relationships to, as each other, families, educators that we're supporting and working with and children. But I also, I guess when I think about well-being and this connectedness, I really hope that we think about that in a broader kind of way, that we're not only nurturing kind of the well-being of our minds, but really thinking about kind of the body and the spirit. someone said thinking with our hearts, and so really want to encourage a more holistic approach when we talk about well-being. And so if you think about that hummingbird and the story of the hummingbird, and the hummingbird wanting to save the forest, using just small drops of water to save the forest. It is a story through which we learn from more than humans, right? And we learn from the land. And so I want to encourage you to think about the land as a source of inspiration and as a source of support for flourishing, or to support and to support well-being as a way to widen and deepen your relationship. So miigwech, everybody, for this just a wonderful conversation this evening. Wish you well. I wish you well-being.